So I released a video a little while ago talking about the new Zeiss Batis 135 f2.8, and that's a lens that for me will never be worth it, but that seems to garner a lot of favoritism. That Zeiss and Batis lines in particular seem to garner a lot of favoritism from Sony shooters in particular, but it's also a lot of fanboyism. And I see a lot of these comments over and over and over and over and over, kind of the same gist. And so I'd kind of like to address some of those in a video. And so I'm going to read some of these comments and I'm going to respond to them. And I hope that you get something out of this. So I'm kind of going to take these item by item, if you will. I think a lot of photographers are fixated on bokeh because subject isolation is important. I think it's very easy to make an image, and it's very hard to make a good image. And one of the differences for me, at any rate, in terms of what I prefer aesthetically, is subject isolation, which requires a certain amount of bokeh. Why are so many photographers fixated on available light? I'm fixated on available light because the type of photography that I come from, being just for fun, I needed as much light as I could possibly get in order to get the shots that I wanted. And so the lenses that I had weren't able to do that. And so my emphasis now is not only on subject isolation, but also on being able to use them in every possible condition that I find myself. I'm not lugging around Sigma lenses with adapters just to have a bit smoother bokeh and less pleasing colors and contrast. If you, obviously, your choice in lenses is entirely up to you. I think, in my opinion, I would rather carry around 2 or 3 lenses as opposed to the 5 or 6 that Color Crush Media seems to be carrying around, just because, I need that creative, when I carry less stuff with me, I'm more creative in how I'm getting the shot. And so I don't want to be lugging around 5 or 6 big heavy lenses in the first place. And so that's kind of an area of distinction, in my opinion, as well. I kind of come from a place where the advice that I received early on was, either buy zooms, or if you're buying primes, don't get primes that are too close together. You gotta double and change perhaps the focal length between your primes just to make sure that you're not overlapping too heavily. And I understand that optically an 85 and a 50 are very different from one another, but I'd almost rather have the 135 optically than the 85 in a lot of situations, and I'd rather have that 135 for just general use when I'm wanting to get that extra reach that the 85 can't give me. Now, I own an 85 and I use that 85 all the time. It's a Canon 85 f1.8 and I think it's magnificent, but the thing is, I almost always want a little bit longer or a little bit shorter, and so that seems to me to tell me that I want either a 50 or a 135 instead of that 85, which makes that 85 a great walk-around lens for me. But if I'm going to invest in primes seriously, I don't want to carry around an f1.4 prime that's 3.5 pounds when I could carry around 2 primes, an 85 that's 3.5 pounds and a 50 and a 135 when I could just do the 50 and the 135. So then Color Crush Media seems to go on about OLED screen, electronic focus by wire, weather sealing, optical image stabilization, T-star coatings, aspheric elements. I don't really see the value of an OLED screen by comparison to the one that you see on a lot of DSLR lenses, which is a very manual one. I don't really get how that's valuable. I actually really genuinely hate focus by wire. Electronic focus by wire, I think that's the worst thing in the world. So in terms of focusing, I hate it. I would rather use manual focus on an adapted manual focus only lens. I hate it, so that's not a feature at all, in my opinion. Weather sealing, it's got decent weather sealing, but the Sigmas have decent enough weather sealing. In my opinion, you're not going to be taking either of these lenses out in absolute shit conditions or underwater where it really makes a difference. These are lenses that are intended for portraiture, right? So you're probably going to be doing it on a clear / slightly overcast but sunny day, not pouring down buckets it's not going to be a lens that's going to have to take a whole bunch of abuse in the first place, so get over your weather sealing. Optical image stabilization, that's a huge feature, but I don't think that's worth the huge price differential. So that's like $600 for optical stabilization and f2.8 versus f1.4, 1.8, pardon me. I don't get it. I don't think it's worth it. You can be faster by a stop in terms of your shutter speed. So again, most of the times you're going to be using this, you're going to have a lighting setup, or you're going to be outside on a sunny day. You can deal with it. Just as a little bit of a disclaimer to this video, the original video and this one will have a little bit of a strident opinion on my part. That's not to say that I necessarily carry that video, it's not necessarily to say that I carry that opinion to its logical conclusion. It's not necessarily to say that I even have that opinion to the strength that I'm presenting it. I'm doing that as a way to, find points of difference that then will create an entertaining video. I perhaps shouldn't care as much as I do, but I'd love it if you were going to comment, if you wouldn't just straight up bash, if you'd actually try to have a conversation with me, because I'd love to have a conversation with you about this. Like, the great thing about mirrorless and Sony mirrorless is that you can adapt anything to it. So everything is E-mount, in my opinion. Like, how well does it play? Like, that does come into it, but so far the Sigmas have played very well with the Sony system through the MC11, and I think that's a fantastic thing that Sigma was very intelligent to do. Sigma's going to be coming out with native E-mount lenses, which is fantastic, but either way those aren't going to have things like IAF, so you're going to have to deal with that either way. But you're probably coming from a system, because most Sony shooters didn't just pick up a Sony and start buying all the Sony stuff. They probably came from Canon, Panasonic, Olympus, Nikon, all these other manufacturers that Sony's been taking a lot of market share from. They're not used to IAF in the first place, so it's a great tool. It's not mission critical, because you've been able to do, and I've been able to do, my job as a photographer and your job as a photographer without it for years, so that's okay. Choice for E-mount, I'm gonna go back to the focus by wire because I freaking hate it. Like, focus by wire is awful. For video, it's awful. The Batis for video is awful because of focus by wire. So what that means is you got peaking, you got zebras, you got a whole lot of great features on your Sony body. The best way to use those is with a manual focus ring that actually physically, mechanically manipulates the optical elements. You're not going to get that on a Batis lens. You're going to get that on the Sigma. So first off, I think A-mount is a joke. I think adapting A-mount lenses to E-mount bodies in terms of for video is a joke. It might perform just fine for stills, but it also substantially limits the number of AF points that you have available, which I think is silly. So I don't like that. So A-mount lenses, their value in my opinion is in terms of those optical designs that Sony should be adapting more quickly onto the E-mount, and that's not what Sony seems to be doing, so I'm not really taking the A-mount seriously. I think the A99 is basically an A7R2, but for people who want DSLRs, and I don't agree with that kind of product development, thinking, because I think it's just trying to skin customers instead of providing the best possible value for the price for customers. So in terms of the way I'm thinking about E-mount, but I get where the guy's coming from about, f1.8 versus f2.8 isn't actually a great way to say, okay, this is better, this is worse. Make a test video. At the time that I made this video, the lens wasn't out from either of them. So, like, Sigma's released the 135 not more recently, previously, and then Zeiss has only released this 135 recently, if they even have. So, the 2.8 to 1.8, I think, is a big difference. That's 1 1/3 stop of light. I'm going to keep making a big deal about that because of the price point and the aperture. I'm getting 1 1/3 stop better light out of the Sigma 135 than I am out of the Batis 135. For a photographer like me who values subject isolation and value for money, that's going to make a big difference. If you have all the money in the world to spend on all your lenses and you get to choose exactly what you want to use for every possible shooting scenario, as opposed to trying to make the most diverse, useful collection of both lenses and bodies, then absolutely go ahead. But to me, I can always stop down a 1.8 to 2.8. I can't stop up, if you will, a 2.8 to 1.8. And so the 1.8 is going to be better because it's more useful in more situations, because I can stop it all the way wide to that 1.8 and get as much light as I could possibly need, and be able to use my ISO more effectively than on a 2.8. Admittedly with stabilization, but you're still never going to get the same quality of bokeh and subject isolation, which is also important to me as a photographer. So that's kind of my response to that. Finally, Robert Sharrow says, I totally agree with this because, again, it just speaks to me of, I've spoken to this previously in other videos. This is an example, in my opinion, of a first-party manufacturer not paying attention to the market and saying, we're going to do our own thing and everybody's going to fall in line because we're doing it. This is so typical of Japanese imaging companies, and I don't get it. So like I'm saying, I just feel like this is another example of a first-party manufacturer saying, whatever I want to do, the masses will approve of because I'm doing it, and they can go and buy it or not. I don't care, because it's so expensive that it doesn't matter if everybody in the world buys it, because I've built so much profit margin into this lens that it's going to work out, because look at my brand name, and that really bothers me. So thank you very much for your time and for your attention. I know this is probably a longer video. I really appreciate you sticking around, and please don't hesitate to like, comment, or subscribe, especially if this was a little bit controversial for you. I'd love to have a conversation. Please don't just go ahead and bash, because that gets nobody anywhere. I hope you understand that sometimes in making these videos, both the first time with the first video and now, it behooves me as a content creator to have a little bit more of a strident opinion than I might in real life. But what I've also tried to do is say, this is why it's important to me to have an f1.8 as opposed to a 2.8 type of thing. But I think the big thing for this lens is the dollar value. You know, like, is the value $500? You know, is that difference really worth it? So it's not for me, but that doesn't mean that it can't be for you. And if it is for you, I'd love it if you could help me understand why without spouting specs at me. Because, like, if you could tell me how it works in with your workflow, or if you just love, you know, focus by wire, electronic focus by wire, or whatever along those lines, I'd rather have that conversation than just useless bashing. So I'm just going to leave that there and hope that hits somebody's ears. And I really appreciate you spending the time to watch this all the way through, and I really hope that you have a lovely day, and I'll see you in the next one. With you.